Well, welcome and thank you both so much for taking part in this conversation today. This is the second conversation that we're hosting as part of some work that we've been doing to explore the role of independent funders in supporting human rights activity. The first of the conversations looked at why this is so important, and particularly here and now. And today we're particularly looking forward to hearing more about a funder's journey towards investing in human rights activity. So we really are grateful for your time today, and I'll just ask you both to introduce yourselves to start with, and then get into your conversation.
I'm David Sampson. I am the Deputy Director at the Baring Foundation, and I lead our UK social justice programmes, among other things.
And I'm Judith Robertson. I'm the Chair of the Scottish Human Rights Commission, and I've been involved in a little bit in this funder conversation from the start. And I just really wanted to ask you, David, can you tell us a bit about what the Baring Foundation does around human rights and why the foundation got involved in this area?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question, but I'll try and break it down because it's been a journey for us over a very long period of time. I think for people who don't know the Baring Foundation, it's worth saying that we are a long established independent funder. We were established in 1969, and we were for a long period of time a corporate foundation for the bank before it collapsed in the mid-90s. But over the last 20 plus years, we've become increasingly focused on how we articulate our mission to tackle discrimination and disadvantage and to really live the values of an independent funder. And in 2018, through a much broader strategy review, we decided that that meant that we would move our purpose to articulate our work specifically through human rights and inclusion. So we now use human rights as a lens for all of the work that we do across our three programmes of arts, international development and UK social justice. And that was, to some extent, a big change for us, but I think it also reflected the reality of the work that we were doing at that point. And so it was a natural way of us being able to bring together the various and quite eclectic work of the foundation under one frame, which really has helped us to articulate why we do things. And I think more importantly, also to articulate why as an independent funder, we think that these are the themes that we want to work on. But we are very practical about that. So our focus has always been on civil society and how civil society affects change and supports those who face discrimination and disadvantage. And so for us, human rights is both the lens through, but then also the practical tool that we can empower communities to really be able to make a difference. Over the last 5 years, we've funded through our UK social justice programme in a very broad way around the law and human rights-based approaches. And that, to some extent, has been experimental for us. So we recognise that human rights and the law can be a really profound tool for civil society and for communities to use to create social change. But we were conscious that the pathways for doing that as a funder weren't always very clear. And there's often, I think, a number of barriers in terms of what that might look like, and a nervousness within independent funders about how to kind of take the first step in that process. And then there's often quite a long time period that we need to invest on that work to really understand and see the benefits of it. And so that's continued to grow, and it's continued to grow in our programmes in all 4 nations of the UK. So it's covered work around the rights of homeless people in Northern Ireland, for example, the rights of women in childbirth, the right to food, which is work which was pioneered in Scotland and has now been taken on in England in a really profound way and has had a real impact on some of the debates in relation to COVID-19. And then, of course, the work that we've done with you, Judith, and the Scottish Human Rights Commission around the right to housing in Scotland, and particularly the project in Leith, which was really kind of one of the foundational projects for us in our learning journey as a foundation around what human rights-based approaches look like and how we fund them. And I think that's probably the point which for me is most important as part of this discussion, that there is a human rights framework which is important, and it's important to engage and understand that. But really for us as a foundation focused on the role that civil society can play in social change, it's how you use those frameworks to empower communities, which is really the important question for us.
I mean, we've been working on that basis of taking a rights-based approach to work, which includes all the components of that, and participation of people with the rights themselves, and building in the legal frameworks, recognizing that the legal frameworks are actually, I think, they're very accessible to people as soon as they engage with them. They're not complicated bits of material. For example, if you look at the Leith video, there's a really nice sort of narrative from some of the residents about why are we talking about human rights, and then the next line or something like that is, well, when you talk about the right to housing, and people sort of immediately go, all right, okay, I get that. And then they talk about it being accessible and of a high quality and of a good standard that doesn't, impinge on your health. Everybody's like, well, that's really basic. I understand that. Of course. And it's like, well, no, it is really basic. But we get very caught up in the sort of legalistic nature of it without actually necessarily interrogating the actual material, which you can look at it absolutely through a legal lens, or you can look at it through the rights that are at stake and really unpack it from that perspective. And as soon as you do that with people, that's when it starts to come alive, and people start to say, well, if these are my rights, why am I living in this, for example, or why is this happening to me? And the questions become much more pertinent and empowering, actually, or the answers become much more empowering. Any other lessons learned, David, from Baring's perspective of what funding this work means and has delivered?
Your journey and the focus that you've taken as a commission has been really interesting, and one which really informed when we were first thinking, well, what does a human rights-based approach look like? How do we articulate that in terms of the calls for funding that we are making? It was actually a lot of your work which was helpful to us there, because as you say, other national human rights institutions have not taken that approach. They haven't put people at their heart in that way to develop that kind of thinking. And so it was a really kind of useful steer for us at the early stages of the programme, and continues to be. This is a route in for those of us who are the converted that now think of human rights as the central frame for the work that we do as funders. But I think it is also for those who are still slightly earlier on in that journey, who don't necessarily look at their mission purely through human rights and use a number of different lenses. And so if you're not yet doing all of your funding in that way, you can still use this work to achieve lots of other parts of your mission. And so close your ears for a moment, Judith, so that you don't hear this as the chair of the Scottish Human Rights Commission. But it plays, I think, into lots of really central parts of what good grant making looks like in the 2020s. And that is about really engaging and listening to the communities that we're here to serve, to understand the problems that they actually want to articulate and to solve, and then giving them the tools and the time to be able to do that. And I think what has really been demonstrated profoundly by the Leith project was that is a way, it is a demonstrable method of managing that process and engaging the professional skills and expertise which is required along the way, but really puts communities at the heart of the work that they're doing. And as a foundation, that has been a really important lesson for us, because we want to see that work being done more broadly within our portfolios. And we recognise that there is always going to be a place for resourcing the expert organisations, those who hold the kind of human rights and legal expertise which is important. But the pathway from community to those organisations is actually a very challenging one for a lot of funders, because it doesn't work through the natural process of project or core grant making. And here is an example where that actually is fundable, and it's fundable now in different forms and in different areas of work. And for us, that's a really exciting part of the journey, and it's one that we've continued to implement in other areas of our practice. So we're now have a specific focus developing in our work around criminal justice and racial disproportionality within the criminal justice system. And for us, that's both a really key area of need within the portfolio that we're working on, but also one where those communities, Black and minority ethnic people around the country, really feel disenfranchised and out of these debates. And for us, the key is, how do you develop those relationships of trust and confidence and allow them to really be able to speak up about the issues that they're facing. And the human rights-based approach is a really important mechanism for us being able to do that. So human rights are important, and thinking about human rights very broadly is important. But I think that for funders who are beginning to start on this journey, who are thinking, well, is this the right moment for us to look at this work in Scotland? There's also lots of other entry points which will be part of the broader discussions that you're having in your own foundations about how you engage and work with people with lived experience of the challenges they face, how we change our grant making to be longer term, to adapt to their needs and give them support over time. And so for me, it's really exciting and continues to be a kind of evolutionary process in how we do this better.
Quite right, though, in terms of what you say. And to be honest, I mean, we use the acronym panel: participation, accountability, non-discrimination, empowerment, legality. And at least 3 of them are core business for most funders all the time. And those 3 would be participation, empowerment, and non-discrimination. That would be, I would imagine, for a lot of funders, pretty core business. I started looking at panel from working in an NGO sphere, working in civil society, not as the Commission before that. I was like, so what is this legality? Even the word is a bit of can be a bit of a turn off for people, but what that means in the human rights context is the legal framework, the human rights framework, and how that taps in. So I did release, I understand what you're saying in terms of the journey, and that, you know, in a lot of contexts, funders are 3/5 of the way or 4/5 of the way down that road. This is but bringing that human rights lens into it does do something else. It isn't just the application of a legal framework, because it impacts on all these other things as well. It impacts on the way people participate and why, and it impacts on the empowerment. I think the funder's role in all that is yeah, I mean, it doesn't need to be all-encompassing, although I might be the guilty party in making it sound like that. But beginning to unpick some of that and understand it, I think, could really support decision-making and what happens on the ground.
What does the opportunity look like in Scotland? And what is the opportunity here for independent funders, and how does that look different?
Yeah, it's very different. I have to say it's really different, and because of the context, and because the government has really, well, it's taking a lot of steps at the moment to bring rights into their public discourse, into their legislative, programme. They're just about to incorporate the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and in a very, full and direct way. They're taking what they're describing as a maximalist approach. So that's the full incorporation, and looking to deliver remedies and routes to justice that are varied and accessible. Now, if they do that, that's going to be the fullest sort of articulation and expression of rights across the piece, and and also real routes to claim those rights and seek remedy if those rights are breached in a really sort of positive way. So taking their obligations seriously and then bringing it into Scots law. Now that creates a very different and much more immediate sort of sense for people that these rights are something that they actually do own, and that they've got some kind of means of engaging with. And so at that level, if funders want to reinforce that, if they want to build on that, that the framework's really current.
That's a really important moment, and it's really important to be very clear about this as kind of day one of a new age for the reality of that within Scottish law. And so I suppose what needs to happen at this point to make sure that it embeds a culture within civil society of using these new opportunities and using them effectively from day one, and how do independent funders support that?
I mean, I think that's it's a great question, and there's 100 answers. To be honest, there isn't one answer. And there shouldn't be one answer. I think that's the conversation we need to have. I'm a member of the National Task Force on Human Rights Leadership, which is doing a lot of the work to bring this bill, this economic, social, cultural rights bill into reality, and that discussion around what's it going to take to implement, really the implementation process is a very alive one, and it needs to happen at all levels. So there's a real lot of opportunity there. But for me, the reason this moment is even more important at a level than the Human Rights Act moment, which you're saying was missed, is that these are the rights that really directly, daily basis, impact on people's lives. These are economic, social and cultural rights. These are now clearly the Human Rights Act, right to family life, etc., fair trial. These are all very important. But when you talk to people about their rights, what they talk about is economic, social and cultural rights. They talk about education, housing, health, work. And so that would be an even bigger miss. because then you're really engaging people where their heart and their lives are. And I think that's also the opportunity for funders, is like, yeah, we can be creative, we don't have to be prescriptive, we can support, we can engage, actually, probably from my perspective, really engage in that conversation. What is going to make the difference to make that implementation real? I think that, and not feel that they have to be shy of having all the right answers, because I genuinely don't think there is one answer. I think there's a multiplicity of processes and ways that could be supported over the next, 5, 10, 20 years. But building understanding, building knowledge, building the muscles, the human rights muscles, I think is what we're in, and it's definitely a marathon, not a sprint.
And to some extent, I think, from the perspective of a funder, there's a lot which is attractive within that, and doesn't have to be 100 different projects all funded through your programs. Actually, there will be funders like us who see that as an interest and a learning process. But for others, it sits at the heart of their view of building up civil society, and that's that kind of, as you say, building the muscles. It's the longer term investment and core support for organisations who can do this, who can continue to learn and play with the ideas and the concepts, and to use the legislation which is there for the best effect. And so it feels to me that there is a space for the whole funder ecology to really be able to engage in it to the extent that that's possible.
There is that scope. I mean, that's what the framework does. And if you're looking at it through a race equality lens, looking at it, if that happens in Scotland, looking at it from the perspective of people with disabilities, for women, any group where you've got real concerns about their well-being, it's all there. It's all going to be there, and that's such an opportunity, I think.
Yeah, and I suppose if COVID has done anything which is positive for us, it's shown us that economic, social and cultural rights are the bedrock of everything that we talk about. They're the reality of the lived experience of everybody, and there is no walking away from that now. This experience for all of us means that it's the moment to grasp this, and I think that makes it an even more exciting time for Scotland.
There's a great opportunity for funders to come out in that, and Scotland holds a huge, as you say, a huge sort of chance to lead that in the UK.
Yeah, once things are in place.
For me, I think if, looking 5-10 years down the line, you would have community organisations, civil society organisations and public authorities in Scotland who are responsible for, who've got this primary obligation in relation to people's rights, able to have a conversation amongst equals, where that articulation of rights isn't seen as a threat. It's seen as a constructive way of having dialogue, a recognition that bringing all the different stakeholders into the room to have sometimes it might be a very difficult conversation or a painful one, but is a really positive route to resolution. That's one thing. And I suppose for me, the second thing would be that there is a increasing ease with the discourse around human rights, and that it's seen as a constructive process. It's seen as a way of looking at policy and looking at practice and looking at process, to say, no, if we start with the rights of people most likely to be affected by this, we're much more likely to get a better outcome.
I think the reality is that this is a moment to keep building this culture. There's so many positive signs in Scotland around how the rights framework can continue to develop and how civil society can use it. And medium to long-term investment is going to be what shows us whether this is going to work or it's not. And so building from that moment and building from it from day one is a really important part of creating a culture which which allows for rights holders, that acknowledges that individuals and communities hold rights and have a legitimate place within public debates and public discourse on the issues which affect them. And independent funders can make sure that there's a space for that, and a developing space for it, and start on that journey with a spirit of adventure, I think, and it will be fun along the way.